But we have to start the day and start this week talking about trade talks, because trade talks between the U.S. and China are reportedly in about the 7th inning or so. The two sides are supposedly close to coming to terms, and according to CNBC this morning, the U.S. is softening its demand that China curb the industrial subsidies that it grants to state-owned businesses. Now, this is a bit of a give that might help make a deal more possible, but those industrial subsidies are a complicated issue we will discuss. Meanwhile, Bloomberg is reporting that U.S. farmers fear that a trade deal would not make things easier for them if the U.S. does not force China to lift its retaliatory tariffs. We've got to break it all down with Rick Newman. Here he is. All right, Rick. Well, can we start by explaining these subsidies, how they work, and why it is surprising, or maybe it isn't surprising, that reportedly the U.S. is softening its demand that China curb those subsidies?
Yeah, a lot of the biggest companies in the Chinese economy are state-owned companies. I mean, the government actually owns and operates them, or partly owns them. So the Chinese government can use those companies to do whatever it wants from a policy perspective. So, for example, those companies can offer cheap prices, below market prices on steel, in order to capture market share around the world. And a lot of Western authorities, economists say that's exactly what they do. So what the United States, what the Trump administration is trying to do here is get them to sort of stop their involvement with these state-owned companies or stop the subsidies. The problem is, like, this is the essence of their economy. It's sort of like saying the Chinese were coming here and saying, we want you to give up capitalism. I mean, so that's the inherent problem with this demand, is it just seems like the Chinese are unlikely to do it because they have to remake their economy completely. So they're probably working on some way to fudge this so that it will look as if they're limiting these subsidies somehow, or perhaps not using the companies in the same way they have in the past.
Frame it as a win, even if it's not a complete curb of those subsidies. And it's worth mentioning that this was never one of the top sticking points that we heard about anyway. You know, we heard that it was tech transfers and IP issues, and now this is kind of the first we're hearing. So it isn't as though the reason there hasn't been a deal yet is because subsidies has been the primary issue. So.
Yeah, that's right. And if it's true that, if these reports are correct, that the U.S. is softening on its demands in this regard, that actually suggests they might be getting close to a deal, because that's how you get there.
Good.
United States is not going to get everything at once.
But isn't this something that we were always worried about, though, that we would start to see the U.S. kind of roll back a little bit on all of those demands, and that the trade deal that we ended up getting, they said that they were like pretty much agreed on some of those enforcement issues. We still don't even know, though, what that enforcement is going to be, what that looks like. Do you at all think that once we do finally get all the details of the trade deal, that everyone's like, wow?
Yeah.
You know,
yes.
wow.
I think that's
I can't believe we spent all that
Yeah.
time, and this is all that we got.
But Trump will still tweet it as a big win.
Well, I mean, the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, is kind of a model here, because Trump made very modest changes to that program. They weren't that big, but he changed the name, rebranded it. Important. Think about Trump. You know, he's really good. He's a branding guy. So he gave it a different name, rebranded it, and called it a huge victory. So I think we're likely to get something very similar here, which is some modest changes in the U.S. trade relationship with China. Markets don't really care about what changes inside the U.S. economy. Markets want this trade dispute to go away. Markets want a normalization of trade between the two countries, and markets would be delighted, and I think you would see the increase in the stock market that Trump so craves if he were to remove the tariffs. That is the thing that would really send the markets up.
All right, well, stick with us.